So welcome to the Berggruen Forum, everyone. I just have one announcement today, and that concerns the next Berggruen Forum in 2 weeks' time on March the 18th. We have an Alfred alum that I'm sure some of you remember, Levi Bridges, who graduated from AU in 2007 and has since become much traveled and had many adventures. And he's going to be talking about his experiences traveling around the US with a group of Mexican carnival workers. Today, we're very happy to have Jean Ellefson, the Assistant Professor of Analytics in the College of Business, someone who's also much traveled, I believe. And the title of her talk today is In Quest of Inclusive Course Engagement, something we're all very interested in and committed to. So thank you, Jean.
Thank you. Appreciate the intro and appreciate the invitation to come and speak and get some ducks in a row. So just a quick little background here. And of course, PowerPoint has stopped working, so give me one moment. But I just wanted to give a little bit of background to myself and kind of where I come from. So specifically, I've worked in, sorry, of course, PowerPoint has completely crashed on me. There we go. Welcome back. And I really started out as a chemical engineer and a philosopher, were my first 2 degrees I did jointly when I was at Washington University in St. Louis. I started working at Xerox as a systems engineer in the early days of the interweb and the World Wide Web as a kind of person who was relying on her audiovisual club skills and working in the computer labs. And really what I've eventually came to learn is that my brain works in systems. So I see systems all around me and I'm constantly out to kind of optimize them and see how they work. So the same thing happened when I moved from corporate into the academic community, and now I'm teaching full time, that I saw these systems around me and I wanted to see what was there. So from my viewpoint, engagement clearly is critical, and I think we're all interested in that, and that's a relatively accepted fact. It leads to better student outcomes, and I have a view that better student outcomes lead to better rewards of teaching. Unfortunately, the same is true, that loop can go negatively. Worse engagement can lead to worse student outcomes and can lead to worse rewards in teaching. And my goal really was to figure out how my role was to optimize that and to make that better in my classroom. And this definition of teaching kind of struck me out of some of the research, that the essential work of an undergraduate college is to open students' minds to important ideas, help them acquire knowledge and skills in areas of lasting value, to develop capacities that will help them succeed in their careers, but also improve their society. So that kind of spoke to a number of the conversations we had. That's actually a fairly recent quote that I pulled, but it really talks to what I feel is the experience at Alfred, and at least the pressure to teach first, advise, support the students, and do research accordingly in order to make that better. So from that perspective, that really spoke to me, and it seemed to me that there were a number of ways to do that in the classroom. And I was trying to figure out what the best ones were to do. So I wanted to explore what was critical for that engagement. And being an engineer and working in quality control and those types of things and running operations and optimizing them around the world, we love checklists. They're kind of easy to follow. They're worth, even pilots use them before every flight. They help us remember to do all the things and check our boxes. And they also ideally provide expert information. So I went off in search of checklists to help me with my inclusive engagement. And I found a couple around like making the syllabus inclusive or making this part inclusive, but I didn't find any that really were the kind of whole of the course that spoke to me. So I started to put together the kind of best of breed and find the parts that seemed to speak to me and put them together in this. So I've created this document that I've put on Google Docs, and I'm happy to share that with anyone who is interested. And I've essentially created kind of 3 different areas. So in that spreadsheet, that is kind of a work in progress at this point in time, although the areas and the questions are somewhat solidified. What really I'm working now is the supportive material, as well as the peer-reviewed articles that support each of those and how they can integrate with that. So, and I'll talk a little more about each of these as we go on, but this is kind of the end product that I have, and I'm attempting to manage my courses too for myself. At least from an engagement perspective, and I'm sharing with others. So the first area that I was specifically looking at was related to content. It seemed that was important. And it seems the main categories around that are, is the content relatable and inspiring? So the questions that we have in the checklist is kind of, do the case studies, examples, and readings reflect the diversity and interests of the classroom? Are there external speakers, role models that link the content to potential futures of all the students in the classroom? And do homeworks, projects, and exam questions reflect the diversity of the classroom, their interests and inspirations? So that was really an area that I wanted to take a look at, and I was intrigued to see how that would come about. And it seemed to even be the simple things, like when you have questions about, so-and-so and so-and-so looking at data, or so-and-so, we like to work kind of those types of examples in the questions, and we see them in the textbooks all the time. Are there names similar to those names that we have in the classroom, right? And are we drawing on the diversity of those names, the diversity of those examples? Are the businesses we're showing examples of what people would recognize from their neighborhoods or their towns, and are they things they care about? One of the articles that I found related to that was an article regarding actually Open University statistics sections, and they had the same idea, and they tested it using their hypothesis that if they use topics that are relevant to all, such as money, education, and health, it would significantly increase retention and pass rates in statistics sections. And sure enough, it made a significant difference. And Open University has a lot of students, so they were able to test that in a fairly large sample. And I think we all know that statistics is not the most favorite class of everyone. Apparently, I don't know. I have a master's in statistics. I think it's fantastic and wonderful. But apparently, it's not the most popular topic for students and not the most approachable. But they found this actually made a big difference. Now, the other resource that I found was actually my graduate assistant found it. Janu Patel very kindly pointed out, these things we're talking about, there's this Facebook group kind of devoted to this and Alfred students' experiences. But if I go on that and find some quotes that are linked to this research and see if those experiences are prevalent here. And so we grabbed some of the quotes related to that. One of the quotes that we have here is being told that my experiences and pieces that I produced around my identity as queer person coming to terms with being queer were insightful and wondrous and clearly encouraged. While pieces produced by my classmates around their identities as BIPOC, especially male-presenting students, are given critiques like crude or undeveloped and looked down upon. So we can certainly see how there's a difference in bias. And the graphic that I have here is actually one of the ones I used from my international marketing course, international business course, where a speaker may be saying something, but in fact, the people that are listening here, based on their cultural backgrounds and their backgrounds from wherever they come from, have a significantly different reception of that message, right? So if we're looking to do that, it is worth spending the time to figure out what exactly those things are. So another student, even the race and ethnicity class, I was the sole Asian and the only person who could challenge the curriculum or speak on anti-American, Asian, Pacific Islander racism, right? So definitely our students are feeling that or have felt that in the past. There's another quote I wanted to add as well. So in this one, why this woman had the nerve and audacity to read the N-word in a class full of white students and only 2 Black kids makes us think, yes, we have academic freedom, and certainly words are what we're here to talk, and we shouldn't shy away from topics that are difficult, but it may be worth considering that the experience of 2 of those students in the class is likely to be significantly different when you're doing those activities than the others in class. And what can you do to try and make that equitable? The other comment we saw was they'd often spend far more and better quality time on, quote, more approachable art and artists. So not the ones that they necessarily knew or renowned with based on their backgrounds. And those backgrounds obviously could be from diverse areas, not necessarily just kind of underrepresented skin tones, if you will, in background. So that's the kind of one area around content and some of the significant things that I thought might at least gave me some more insights into how to consider the content that I was presenting in my class, how to write my exams and questions to be able to be more inclusive, what content I chose to use if I'm going to look for an example. I specifically look for a variety of faces and experiences and business types in those examples, specifically because I want everybody to feel involved and to see futures for themselves. So that's kind of the relatable and inspiring content. The next area I looked at was mechanics. So to me, there was just the kind of how is the course structured, where is it located, when are things due, and kind of all the classes have that same kind of mechanics of structure. So is there flexibility around due dates and assignments, recognizing diverse circumstances to which students are subject? Is the instructor available through omni-channels, email, like we expect our companies to be these days? Are they available, and however we kind of want to get to them or are comfortable getting to them, right? I know a lot of students will chat, with text, but are loath to kind of unmute their phones and ask a question or unmute their Zoom. I think we see that pretty significantly. Are students encouraged to use resources such as library support, tutoring, writing lab, or similar, and welcome and kind of continue to do that as well? Are the required course supplies available and accessible for the lowest cost that they can be? And is there flexibility of format in course submissions, video, text, presentations, and audio? So these are some other areas where we see this. So there's a significant amount of research actually around this. I love The Hidden Brain, which is a great podcast that I get to listen to. I'm missing my podcast as I drive. I don't drive back and forth, Alfred. But what was interesting about that is students from disadvantaged backgrounds often find succeeding on the path of upward mobility through education requires that they distance themselves from their communities, family, and friends. And the university, the supposition is that the university would be in their interest as well as helpful to do this for students, help fill in this. There's also significant research that the students who are at risk are far less likely to utilize the needed resources or negotiate with the system, right? And there's a number of papers on the reasons for this, and we can speculate. And there is some research suggesting different reasons. But at the end of the day, I just know from my perspective that this is enough evidence to me to say that my students are less likely to say, how can I get help? Or who should I go talk to? Or I bet I'm going to go talk to the professor. If they're not grown up in a culture that pushes back on those things or that engages directly with, that engages and kind of negotiates for things with authority. It's not common for everyone. And then the other things that we found is that students in these areas are more likely to work, more likely to have childcare responsibilities, and more likely to have cognitive overload from daily requirements of getting along. There's even a great study about Indian farmers that when in the wealthy season, they actually test higher on cognitive skills tests than they do in the kind of season when they're poor, which shows a direct impact on cognitive skills of this overload. And it seemed to me that there were things that I could do. We have a fantastic group of people here that help with universal design, that help with finding open resources that are free. I switched to a textbook in a couple of my classes, a free textbook. And in fact, in the cases that I've switched to already, it's actually much better than the one that I had before. And it's more accessible to the students as well. It's more readable and it's more current. So I'm very happy with those kind of changes. And I really wanted to kind of take that challenge to get to those lower costs. So I didn't have students at the beginning of the semester, I'm behind in the reading because I haven't gotten the book yet. And you can tell they're kind of negotiating finances to get there because of all the expenses up front or waiting for financial aid. And I just wanted to relieve them of that as they can. So we have some other students here who have said, and I know that there's a culture of having really strict due dates and, knowing that our students to be successful in the world need to be able to keep commitments. Great project managers and organized people generally do very, very well compared to those who are kind of haphazard around. But if that's not core of the course, should they be into how tough should the penalty be for that? Was the kind of conversations that I was going to, at least in my head. So here's a quote from an alum. I was docked points for not strictly adhering to her schedule, despite my many attempts to communicate I had been taking 20 credits that semester. I would try to hand in work early, which she wouldn't accept. Right, so how flexible are we willing to be for our students so they can balance their lives? And then when I visited the president's house, an alum from the 60s maybe decided to say, where did your family come from? Are they illegal? Mind you, I was one of only 2 people of color at this event, and all the students, staff from AVI were people of color, right? So we have this other overhead and cognitive overhead that some of our students have to carry that is related to the fact that, they have these incidents and they have this thing, their peers and colleagues by some definitions are only the people who are working in these roles, and so they're misidentified potentially. And how does that impact their aspirations and their capabilities as well? And then another note, and this actually is a theme that is quite significant in a lot of the feedback that we received. These are not individual incidents, unfortunately. When we were yelled at by a group of white males on how Black History Month should not be a thing, right? And if we think about the cognitive overload of trying to deal those things while focusing on studies, which I don't know about you, but when I'm focusing on getting something done, there's all sorts of things that are very important in organizing. I don't have paper clips to organize anymore in order to avoid writing a paper, because we don't use those, but I think we all know that any sort of cognitive overload does build up. I also wanted to just take a look in light of the previous conversation around the different messaging to people. If you look at this kind of welcome to AU picture that I pulled from our website, you know, a large armed person lying on the ground, along with a number of students with big signs and kind of gathered. And you know, I think there's a few people of color in that. They don't look nearly as excited as the rest of them, kind of hanging in the back. But that may not say welcome in the same way to everyone. I'm not sure that everyone receives the kind of welcome and excitement that some of us may receive from looking at that. So it's worth considering how that is perceived on the other side. So in addition to mechanics, which is that kind of area, the engagement really seems to be the largest group. So if we look at engagement, there's clearly a message in kind of every teaching literature you read about kind of starting out, learn their names. You got to call them by their names. They at least have to think you know their names. There is a great study about the importance of students perceiving that an instructor knows their names in a big biology class at a large university. And in fact, what they found out is that the value is really that the students perceive you know their name. So if you want to use name tense and they use the name tense to refer to the students, that was okay too. And I know when I first joined, I did my master's in systems design and management at MIT. And even in built into the desks, there was a little groove, and we all had our little name sign, and we would all, you know, place our name sign into our slot when we sat in the room. And I knew that I was going to have I'm not so good with faces and names, and I knew I was going to have a really hard time trying to remember. So I wanted to kind of reproduce some of this. So Kathleen Hillman in the business department helped me create this name tent. And unfortunately, the ones I have in my office that are actually printed, this was in a slightly earlier vision. But on one side facing the student, we added enablers for your success. So we had my office hours, phone number. We then wanted to call out the other resources to have, like the writing and math lab, the counseling center for academic excellence, our assistant dean, College of Business, Dean Chelsea Ames, who's very helpful and a source for everyone to go to. And we wanted them to ask for help, and we want you to succeed. So I wanted them to remember that as they were maybe staring at it while they were being lulled by my lectures. And then we see another example of this out in the world, the name tense for relationship building. So here's one where they can actually use it and do some coloring, right? But definitely there's clearly value to that. And also in the alumni feedback, we do see some quotes associated with that. So we see the constant and blatant disrespect from the white professors who couldn't pronounce my name right, or any of the uniquely named colored students, and would always ask, is there another name we could call you? Maybe a short, easy name. So definitely something to think about as our alums remember those things years later. My professor's only getting the Black students' names mixed up, but got every white kid's name right. Definitely sticks as well. So how do we figure out how to learn those names? I think the wonderful thing about Alfred University that I'm enjoying is the small class sizes and the ability to have the opportunity to learn each individual student's name, as well as a bit about them and their aspirations and kind of what they want to do in life, so I can help them achieve them and make sure we have the course aimed to that, as there's a lot of customization we can do. So that's the engagement, learn the names. As we drift into then recognizing that individual, right? So once you get beyond the names, so is there a way for the instructor to get to know the students through survey, discussion group, introductory meetings, or similar? Again, I think we have the advantage, we have smaller classes. I usually do an introduction on discussion group so people can introduce, as well as in the class. I like to ask them to share an aspiration that they're willing to share, maybe tell what they're excited about in the class or why they're taking it. A lot of times it's because it's required. But at least it gets me to know something that I can include in there going forward. Is the student encouraged based on their unique contributions rather than because of their category, right? So sometimes those are human monkey brains just love to stereotype. It's so effective for us in many ways, but in other ways it's such a travesty. So I really like to work and try to figure out and challenge myself to make sure that I'm treating people as individual based on their contributions and their capabilities and what I see them do and see what they're interested in, rather than some assumption about kind of where they come from or how they're doing. And then is each student treated as an individual to be understood and inspired and never requested to represent a category? So this is something else that we see contributes to the stress. So some of the research that supports these things, a summary: African-American students attending PWCUs, predominantly white college and universities, are less likely to pursue graduate school, have lower GPAs, and report greater minority status stress. Classroom microclimates may impact this, and this specific study dives into that. But our student feedback is similar to that. So one student said, being expected to answer questions because I'm Black. The favorite one was, do you think the Black Panthers were a terrorist group? The question was directed to the class and then immediately to me. Like, sir, you already know what I'm going to say. I want to know what these 23 white kids are thinking. Right, so that's kind of the take back. And I know for myself, when I'm teaching and I cover these topics, I immediately want to turn to someone who looks like they might be knowledgeable. And to pull myself back from doing that and say you can't ask them to represent that category. I know I have been the, as a female engineer, as a executive in India working, I have very often been in the sole category of being the only one in the room as an executive in British organization. I've very often been the only one of my kind of look and feel, if you will, and occasionally apologize to for a swear word or whatever it might be, because of course I'm the weaker sex. And it never makes me feel comfortable, and that doesn't carry nearly the overhead that what our students are having to deal with. So I can certainly relate in a very, very tiny way, but it's definitely something to think about regardless of the desire to want to have them participate in certain ways. And there may be people who don't appear to be in that category that actually are very interested in responding to some of those questions. On a similar vein, in a dance class, I was the only Black person and was picked to dance to a Beyonce song for warm-ups because I knew Beyonce and I looked like her. If I didn't do it, I'd be a disappointment to my people, she was told. So certainly, and she was, there's much more to this particular story, and she was quite frustrated that the professor didn't ask, does anybody know the dance, or ask any of all of her other white classmates that may perhaps actually know the dance. I know at one point in time, myself knew the dance with a few other people, so not that I do it publicly, but there are other people that might actually know that dance, and we shouldn't make those assumptions. There's also the countless professors assuming socioeconomic status and diminishing the academic abilities before any interactions with me. Again, those stereotypes that our monkey brains love to do and trying to work and make sure we overcome them. And then we also have this is a predominant theme. I don't know if you've read the kind of poems and books like Don't Touch My Hair. There's some great children's books with lots of poems about kind of racial differences. But I thought this was an illustrative quote. I'm tired of students and professors asking to touch my hair and proceed to try without giving them approval. I'm not some darn pet. Don't touch me or my hair. Right. So I think there is something to be said that I hope our students wouldn't have to kind of deal with that on a regular basis. So this is definitely the kind of recognizing the individual area of engagement, and I think some food for thought there as well. The next one is from engagement is enabling realities. So what are these ongoing two-way communication regarding midterm feedback, demonstrating listening? How is the class going for you? What could use different? And it could be content, it could be mechanics, it could be whatever. I have done those now as a midterm survey in Canvas, and I always get some good information. Does the instructor encourage difficult and productive conversation in the classroom? Some of these are just awkward and darn hard, right? When we do management information systems and we talk about, when I talk about kind of the weapons of mass destruction, the book that was written and talking about how artificial intelligence systems starting to make lots of decisions, neural networks are starting to make lots of decisions, and how they're biased, and how Google did not have the capability to distinguish between gorillas and Black people, and how did they deal with that? those are awkward conversations when you're in a diverse classroom with people from small town mid-America and people from the city. I was not relishing walking into those conversations, but I managed the first time. I don't know, maybe there's some students writing a Facebook page about my managing. I hope not, but I'm continuing to try, and I'm continuing to kind of take that on to do that. Is there follow-up with students to understand, encourage, and support them when they miss class, assignments, or fall behind? Do student interests and aspirations change the course content to enable relevance and inspiration? And when recommendations or opportunities are presented, does the instructor make an extra effort to consider non-mini-me students? Again, that monkey brain working to align ourselves with other birds that look just like us, right? So some interesting quotes here. A white student told me to comb my hair regularly and stop wearing my puff because it was too wild and got in the way of others learning. So this crosses a couple different categories. I don't know, I've never been told that about my hair. This picture is actually taken from an article about natural hair in corporate America. I don't know if you've been exposed to it, but there's a significant amount. In fact, UPS just changed their dress code this year or last year to having to be a more culturally aware dress code of what is professional and is it only that which is defined by kind of the typical white America professionalism. And I'd like to think it's not. I've luckily been always able to wear my hair naturally, and I wish others to be able to do the same. The other area that we have, I don't know if some of you may recognize Jarvis Alexander. I had him as a student, and unfortunately he was tragically killed in a mass shooting in Rochester. And frankly, there's been a lot of things that have gone on that even in the past 2 years associated with obviously Black Lives Matter and police shootings, and how do we handle those in the classroom? And this is a quote actually from previous years. It seems that there were other things going on campus, similar but different. And they were talking about the professors and said none ever wanted to pause their lesson for a day or two to talk about the disgusting atrocities. Hell, they didn't even utter a word. They expected students of color to see, process, and go back to classes like normal. They never stood for us and never took the initiative to teach our history or learn about it when it was sorely needed. I don't know about you, but one of the reasons I'm teaching is because I'm excited to and want to be able to help students. And one of the reasons why it's not just online university and Khan Academy is because we have the great responsibility as well as privilege to help students, in my mind, get to the adulting stage and become fantastic members of society. And in that, it really requires us to try and figure out how we do this. So that's certainly my continued challenge. I know last year for the teach-in, I specifically spent the day on the Russian campaign to divide us, using some of the data that was presented by a University of Minnesota study that was released due to the Freedom of Information Act, showing how divisive the ads were from a race perspective. Was kind of my attempt to do that. The first time I taught it, again, kind of awkward and nerve-wracking a little bit for me. My third or fourth time now that I've worked it into the curriculum, I think it's still effective, and I think I've gotten better at managing those conversations. The research to support that results suggests that exposure to creative coursework, which is this changing as we go through, is a significant positive predictor of student engagement, even after controlling for sex, transfer status, enrollment status, first generation status, age, SAT, ACT, race, ethnicity, major, grades, percentage of online courses, institutional control, and institution size. So how powerful is that? As to Alfred, our diversity, this is for college factual. We may have some other numbers, but this is the ones that my grad student actually kindly helped me snag. So Alfred diversity, we have an above average student body. In fact, two of our three reasons for going to Alfred pop up, at least on college factual. One is a great price value for your money, click. And the other one is high overall diversity. If we dive into the specific numbers, we do have an above average student body. Specifically with regard to gender, it's very well balanced and high diversity. Geographic diversity is high. Ethnic and background is high compared to the national average. And we can see how that plays. So we do have above average student body and unfortunately below average faculty from that. I found this great shot that kind of illustrates that. We have Mark Zupan walking with a diverse group of students. And in fact, if we look at a lot of the quotes, there is a lot of, older white people and diverse faculty, or from a faculty perspective, and kind of how do we overcome that? I think we've accepted that it's a somewhat of a reality due to a lot of different factors. We're obviously working to change it and continue to do that, but with any kind of large pool that you're trying to change, trickles of water going in take a long time to actually change what you have there. Sorry, my chemical engineer drifting in there. So what I did this actually start to look at these numbers. So if you look at these numbers, we have the faculties and the student based on this. And in our stories, I think we can see this as well, right? We see that that poor American Indian or Alaskan Native kind of hanging out without really any representation. We see the Hispanic and Latinxs represented here. We see the Black or African Americans compared to those ratios. So the other thing I did was just to make this a little more viewer friendly, was do this on a ratio comparison chart. So we can see, if we look at these numbers, we can start to really see where we go from there. So we can see that the Asians, in fact, there's more faculty than there are students. We can see the non-resident aliens, there's again more faculty than there are students. The whites, there's a little more faculty than there are students. But the Hispanic, Latinxs, the Black African Americans, and the American Indians or Alaskan Natives are really a bit shy in having representatives in there. And I think it doesn't mean, in my mind, at least, be interesting to see some data that proves it, but it doesn't mean that it can't be overcome. But it does, in my mind, mean that there's conscious effort required on those of us who are in the majority to be able to recognize that those conditions may be different, and how do we do these things to engage. So look at that data. So what I've gone over really is what I've implemented in that checklist. This is simply another view of it. The best of breed course engagement backed by research. So the areas of content, interaction mechanics, some of them are overlapping, but at least we get a better understanding of kind of a summary of what all of those items are. I wanted to just give a thank you to the alumni for sharing their experiences and words, which I've pilfered from Facebook. I want to thank my students. I did want to recognize the Alfred Anti-Racist Action Community or Committee, which I've been engaging with and has been really helpful to allow me to kind of follow this path and take a look at these things and explore them, as well as the Provost Office and Student Senate for sponsoring the anti-racist book clubs and events, my friends of color who are ever patient with me in my dark conversations and naivete, the student activists that I've met on campus that are willing to have these conversations as well, the provost, the dean of the College of Business, and other encouraging faculty. I have some personal soundboards as well that are also part of the majority that I use. The library team and the Universal Design for Learning team has been infinitely helpful as well with this. And the diversity hiring training, I'm on a search committee now, so we have been attempting to work to find solutions to this. So I just wanted to say, obviously those things are going. So from my perspective, just as a summary, so I've been inspired really by my kind of past 2.5 years to get better step by potentially and likely awkward step. Being outside of that expertise zone to tackle topics and risk offense and embarrassment in the interest of enabling engagement and inspiration for all. I've been inspired to assume good intention on the part of others, to ask to understand and seek that common ground. I've been inspired to add a brave space statement to my syllabi that declares my intent and welcomes feedback, to review research and incorporate likely and proven methods to engage, including the implementation of my engagement checklist in my classes, to improve my engagements with students and help them identify their potential North Stars and support them in achievement regardless of the package. So I'll ask, what are you inspired to do? And thank you.
Thank you, Jean. You packed a lot in there, so I'm sure there's some questions. People can either unmute themselves and ask questions directly, or you can put things in chat and either I or Jean can read them out. And if no one's, I've got a couple of questions, Jean. One thing I was interested in is with this concern with diversity. When you were in places like India, was there the same concern in institutions that you were part of as we have here?
Yeah, but I would say the concern was much different, right? India is predominantly associated with caste and kind of religion, and far less with their skin color variations are different, but there was definitely that kind of concern. There was far less of a, so it was far more of a concern of treating people equally than it was specifically this kind of racial diversity.
There's a question from Kevin. I'm interested in instructional design. I was wondering if in your checklist you include a way of platforming student voices, perspectives, and even expertise through course design and/or classroom conversation. That is, using active learning frequently in favor of the lecture model.
Absolutely.
Can you see that, Jean?
I can. I was working to understand. So Kevin, yeah, thank you. And thanks for your help with the OER resources as well, and all the other things. But I would definitely say that specifically, I mean, I tend to do feedbacks regularly, and specifically on most assignments, I'll have a feedback, right? We'll cover data information in companies, and I'll have every student create a presentation on a company in the real world using data and information. And it gives me a really good understanding of what companies they're interested in, what research methods, or what specific their aspirations are. Ideally, they're doing things that are interesting to them and not just things they can easily find on the internet. But so we specifically do that. I definitely have those types of, from a high level perspective, outlined on my checklist, but I'd love to have your input on some of the supporting information and tools and material for how to do these things, the area that I was still fleshing out.
I've got a question, if I could jump in, Jean. Thank you so much for all of that. I really appreciate how you pair the evidence with specific examples at Alfred, because that reminds us that we're not a unique university. This is a problem in higher ed, but it also is very individualized for us. We have a small community, as you said, and so there's a lot of room to use that knowledge to change things. And so I was wondering if you had any of that research about the other side of it, that sort of systems thinking when it comes to solutions. I can imagine, and I've been in situations where I hear of evidence from students, they say, this happened to me, or Mallory, you did this. And I feel like I'm a failure and I have done something terrible. And what I am trying to do is shift my thinking toward the systems thinking and say, like, I'm part of a bigger machine. I have a responsibility to do the best that I can. So I was wondering if you have any research you could share with us, or experience in combating that reaction, that like bad feeling, or that I have failed, or there's something wrong with me, that gets me out of my own way a little bit and more toward the solutions you propose.
Yeah, absolutely, Mallory. In fact, one of the articles that that is out there and referenced is actually about a kind of peer group that gets together on a regular basis to talk to each other, of educators, as they go through this, and how that significantly helped, right? And I certainly appreciate you as one of my peer groups that I've been using here to do that as well. So I definitely think that is one of the things to do, and certainly from a systems perspective, realizing that you are a part of that system is always, I always find useful as well, and looking at what things are influencing you and how you figure out how to do differently going forward. And I don't know, I just love that little Christmas special with Santa and the penguins, and they sing the little song as they're all going around about taking one step in front of the other, just put one foot in front of the other. And soon you'll be walking through the door and can go all over the world. And you gotta break it down and just take is a step forward better than where you are right now, and just keep going forward in that way, without the, yeah, you can be angry at yourself, but just move on. I also find it's rarely about you, right? When I was reading these quotes, I understood the, I understand the frustration and the from a instructor perspective, but by the same token, these are students who have entrusted themselves to us, their money, their time, their futures. And so there's another bit of me that says it's great responsibility, and with great responsibility comes, with great power comes great responsibility. And from that perspective, I think it's just really important for us to figure out how we can help the students who are in that position, rather than getting caught up in our own kind of ego or about it or this or that, and just figure out, how can we make it better for them, as that's what we're trying to do.
Can I make can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Gary.
Okay, I want to make an observation, and I want to make a suggestion. And the suggestion is just something that I do in my own classes. And I have a fair number of students. I have about 70 students this semester, and that's kind of typical. Is that I make a point of talking to every single student, either in my office before COVID or since COVID, either on Zoom or by phone. But the kind of call that usually lasts in the neighborhood of about 15 minutes or so, where I'm going to ask these students about, where they come from, what their interests are, where they've been, blah, 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 a whole bunch of different things that kind of conveys to them that I do take them seriously as individuals. I think that they are, for the most part, in terms of the feedback I get, very positive about this kind of interaction. And I mentioned it because, one of the points that you made was we really do need to communicate. And one of the ways we can communicate is not with a collective class. It certainly is because we are a relatively small school and most of our classes are, reasonable size. I think that everyone can do that sort of thing. I certainly would recommend it. I've been doing it for years and I think that it has worked quite well. The observation that I wanted to make has to do with one of your slides on the PowerPoint where you talked about professors, plural, touching a student's hair, countless professors assuming that they knew where I was from and that I'm not a very good student and so forth based on my color. And I know the Alfred University faculty pretty well, as I think that probably most of us do. And I'm just dubious about that. Maybe that really happened. And but to suggest, as I think you're kind of suggesting, or at least based on the context of what we were reading there, that this is common, I just don't believe it. And I may be wrong. I mean, I certainly give myself the right to be incorrect about that. But I think that we have a faculty here that, regardless of race, is really very respectful of students. And we have gone through training. I think that we're very, very conscious of the need not to do the sort of things that sometimes we're accused of doing. That's my observation. As I say, maybe I'm incorrect.
So let me follow that up a little bit. And I think I highly encourage you to read the document that my GA put together, and I'm more than happy to share the link to the Google Doc, which is predominantly anonymous from a student perspective. But frankly, publicly available on Facebook if you choose to search. But I also think, well, it may not be common, and I think the Me Too movement has given us a better look at this reality. For a student, common maybe twice in 4 years, but is twice in 4 years is probably too many times for a student to have that experience. So I think having this idea that those around us seem fairly nice, and when we are with them, they're perfectly acceptable, is definitely a flaw to consider. I know my personal corporate experience would say that's definitely a flaw to consider. And I certainly want to believe these students. They have no reason to make these things up, especially as they are now alumni. So given that we accept their truth, I think we should question why those things are happening with that predominantly, and how do we make sure they don't happen again going forward.
After the Vietnam War, there were stories, and they were common stories, and we heard this for 2 decades, of veterans coming back from Vietnam, getting off the plane in San Francisco or Los Angeles or whatever, and crowds of younger people there spitting on them. And there were enough accounts of that so that I think the vast majority of Americans assumed it was true. And yet there is not one iota of evidence that actually ever happened. But kind of an urban legend. I heard that right here in this village. I simply don't believe that it happened, and I think that there's evidence that it did not happen. With what you're saying, maybe it did. You may be correct. Maybe twice in 4 years.
Let me be clear that these are firsthand accounts. So this is not somebody heard about somebody being spit on. This is firsthand account of students saying, my teacher said my hair looks like the Predator in Predator. My teacher touched my hair. I'm tired of it.
Okay, I'm dubious, but I could be wrong. I'll leave it at that.
There's another question in the chat from Alex. says she's having difficulty seeing how diversity would be introduced in engineering. Do you have any examples as an engineer?
I think there's a lot of ways to do that. And Mallory, there's also a
That's from Alex.
request to put the link in the chat. Would you mind doing that? I don't want to have to look through my mail to pull it, and I know I sent it to you.
Yep, no problem.
Thank you. So Alex, I think it's a great question. And I think so from an engineering perspective, in my mind, the diversity that I mean, obviously there's kind of who you talk about and what companies you talk about and what examples you use, right? And you can provide a little bit of diversity there, but you have far less choice, I think, in who you bring in to help out. You're just after technical skills. But I also think the being sensitive to people's expectations in class and legitimate feeling like they're the odd person out, and making sure that you do an extra effort to bring them in, and if they're having trouble, catch them early, and to be able to make sure that when you talk to them, I mean, I had a phenomenal, and I'm going to go English, but I had a phenomenal English teacher in high school that would always tell us, when you take your trip to Boston, you need to go here, and when you take your trip to London, you need to go here. And I remember sitting in my little milk bread classroom in Wisconsin thinking, I'm not going to go to any of those places. There's just no way. And yet every time, and in fact, our publication we did, was When We Meet in Boston, when we did our little collection of writings in high school. And when any of us went to Boston after that, we would write each other and say like, hey, I'm here. And hey, I'm there. So I think, for me, at least, one of the inspiring ways you can do is to actually talk to students legitimately about, hey, what are your aspirations and how do we help you get there? And what internship should we get? And you should apply to this internship at this place. We should set you up with a work experience at this place. We should shadow you. You should shadow this person. I have a friend in Corning that, has some of the ethnic background that you have. Would you be interested in doing something with them? Just to make that real, that they can have those futures and they don't feel not, like that's the other people that go do that.
Okay, well, Jean, it's past 1 o'clock, and so we need to finish. But you've given us a great deal to think about and some great material there. So people are thanking you in the chat. The Bergman Forum has been recorded, and that will be posted on the Bergman Forum YouTube channel in due course. So the link will go out to that. Okay, so I want to thank you on behalf of everyone, and thank you again for a wonderful presentation.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.